just got us some new Street Fighter 6 footage featuring one of the most anticipated characters of the entire starting roster, and that is Miss Cammy. She takes on Manon in the latest batch of footage that we've seen, and we are here to analyze that, tell you guys what we think, some of the stuff that stood out to us, what we think this means for Cammy as a character, as well as a handful of the others that have been more recently shown: Manon, Lily, Honda, Zangief, and Marisa. So we got a lot to get to.
Yeah, we watch all this footage multiple times and we slow it down frame by frame. We really try to break this down for our audience, getting right into it. Cammy's light confirms from Street Fighter V are back again. They are a big time thing, and so what is completely different is her lack of damage. She can't hit you worth beans right now. If you go back and look at all those light confirms, they are doing barely any damage. It looks crazy. John, what do you think of Cammy going from a freight train, where it's like this is one of the hardest hitting characters in the game, to maybe being the worst hitting character in the game in terms of damage?
I think that we have the same idea for Cammy that we have for a long time now, at least Street Fighters 4 and 5, and that was a problem in 5, as everybody knows, because she was overtuned. She was too fast and had too much maneuverability on top of the ability to do so much damage and stick on you. Now, the developers at Capcom for Street Fighter 6 have been showing that they've been paying attention to specific problems, and I think they've done that here without taking away what the character wants to do. She wants to zip around. She wants to be on you from every different angle. She wants to have these confirms from fairly easy, like, lights and mediums, but she doesn't get the benefit of the damage, and I think that's the balancing act that the developers are doing here. I don't know how that's going to manifest with, the rest of the cast, but I like what I'm seeing thus far in terms of, if you are a Cammy player, you can still do all the crazy stuff you want to do for the most part, but you're gonna have to hit him a few more times, and that feels right given her advantages.
Yeah, and not only can you do all the crazy stuff you can do at 5, you can do quite a bit more. And couple that with, I believe she might have the fastest walk speed in the entire game that we've seen so far. She is fast. She is not kind of fast. She is lightning fast. Her spin knuckle actually looks to be way faster than it used to be, and it can be canceled to create a cross-up when she's very close to the opponent, which seems very tricky to block. Normally it just ends up on the same side, but if she's really close, you can get a cross-up with it. And then her EX cannon strike, the dive kick, it can be done 8 frames after leaving the ground, so the height restriction isn't super bad on this one. You can do it pretty low to the ground, relatively speaking, not counting the pre-jump frames.
Did you know whether or not the spin knuckle was advantageous on block, or if she's disadvantageous?
I did not look up that part yet. It does look like she can use it as a pretty good utility move, though. On hit, I believe she can continue the combo afterwards. On block, I'm assuming it's negative.
Yeah,
it's probably the end of the...
Yeah, switching sides and stuff. One of the things I was noticing about her is that it looks like with she's got forward advancing attacks, because of course she does, but it looks like Capcom is putting the onus on the defender here to stop her in the startup of her is the hooligan into the overhead kick, and then she's also got, like we talked about, the spin knuckle. To me, it looks like she has ways in, and if she gets in with those, meaning she does and also the dive kick, if she does that successfully and you block it, she's got an advantage now. But it's on you as the defender to swat her in the startup of those, be looking for those things, and that's kind of the game you're probably going to be playing against Cammy players, where, it's the same idea as a jump in, right? Any character can jump forward, and if you just block that jump in, you're probably at disadvantage because they've just done a move where they have, frame advantage on you, and you have to deal with that situation, but the onus is on you to simply anti-air them, and that's where that game is played. And I think Cammy kind of has that in spades, but again, she's going to have to hit you a lot of times in order for it to matter.
Yeah, well said. And her hooligan combination looks to be a much larger part of her overall gameplay than it was in Street Fighter 6. You barely saw it in Street Fighter 6. Now you're seeing it all the time. The same goes for her spin knuckle. That is a really nice thing to see, because you're going to see a lot more variety with Cammy players this time around. And then after Cammy's spin kick from her hooligan combination, you mentioned this, she looks to be very plus on block against Manon. Now, Manon's a tall character, so not 100% sure on that it's going to be the case every single time, but there is a lot of block stun there, and it looks like Cammy can do pretty much whatever she wants to from that point. And then the last thing I've got for Cammy is her standing medium kick. This is right back from Street Fighter V. It looks like it's going to be very effective at causing burnouts when the opponent... Yeah. When the opponent is low on drive gauge, because it has great range, it's fast, and it takes about half a bar of drive gauge away on block. So
just
that
the
is not
medium
something.
kick by itself, just a normal
Standing medium kick by itself, that sucker is going to be able to knock your drive gauge down. So it seems like Capcom took all of Cammy's strengths and said, okay, we're going to take a couple of these away and then put them in different spots now, which I'm really happy to see. This character was just so brain dead stupid, good for most of Street Fighter V's lifespan. They knocked her down properly, and now they give her variety on top of it, plus some maybe jiggle physics. Is that what we're seeing, John?
Yeah, well, exactly. That's the first thing I noticed out of all this is that standing medium kick looks like it's got a lot of utility for a lot of different reasons. But yes, that does seem to be her standard poke. So she's going to dance around in the neutral, but inevitably Cammy's going to go to the air, or she's going to use, maybe even a random spiral arrow or a spin knuckle. But the point is, Cammy is an offensive character. She still is that. But I'm very intrigued to see how this all works within the atmosphere of Street Fighter 6 and whether or not Capcom has done a good job of keeping the character who she is, but making her play better with others. And so far, it looks good.
Yeah, looks real good. So Manon's up next, and I want to get into mention that command grabs in level 3s all seem to universally cause hard knockdowns. And what that means is that you can't tech the knockdown, and that means that your Okazumi situation after you get a command grab or after you get level 3'd is always going to be universally the same. So you can't like delay your wake up and all the other stuff and whatnot. And so it's going to vary depending on the character. Manon seems to be a little bit closer to other people, but this is a big change here where if you have a hard knockdown, that means your Okazemi is always going to be predictable for the offensive person, the person who knocked you down. And so getting into Manon here a little bit more, she seems like a very patient and not wild grappler that needs to use her jabs and a lot of methodical play to open people up. She does not seem like she's built to take risk. A lot of dodging in and out, pick your spots. She has a crazy overhead that seems to hit from about half screen here against Cammy. I have never seen a grappler with a half screen overhead. I've just like, wow. So, and then Manon has an overdrive kick, or just like her special kick. I don't know exactly what it's called, but she uses that a lot as anti-air, which leads into a command grab combo. Like it's a full-on combo if she hits her EX special and gets a command grab after it. That is really nice, and it seems like her kick special needs to be used consistently throughout the match to anti-air, as it opens up just so many possibilities for her. So very fundamental here. Manon's not one of those seems like crazy grapplers or anything like that. Even though she's got a lot of reach with her legs. Even though she's got a half screen overhead, a lot of stuff she's doing most of her damage from one-off scenarios. Her combos are not great. You really need to use her reach and mobility to play a fundamental game with her, and then you can get going.
Yes, I am not seeing, it looks like Street Fighter 6 is taking the grappling archetype in a whole different direction than it's been before, and I'm actually excited about this too, because as we've talked about on this channel many times, grapplers don't tend to play all that well with other Street Fighter characters to a certain point, because they become this all or nothing game. The game against grapplers, or for them, is this sort of can they get in or not, and once they've gotten in, they're way too powerful. When they're too far away, they're way too weak, and like that's just it's been something that's been around for a long time, but maybe it's not time for that anymore, especially when you have all of the mechanics that the drive system gives you. So what I'm seeing a lot of, including with Manon, is that they can land command grabs, but they don't necessarily seem to have vortex, and maybe not even with spending a drive rush bar afterwards. And a lot of the footage that we've seen, I haven't seen a lot of continued pressure after command grabs, even maybe in the corner and even after EX. It seems like those are, like you said, for one-off damage. And I thought maybe Manon's would become better as she levels up with her command grab system. Every time she lands one of these, it gets better in some way. And I thought maybe that takes off, some drive gauge or something when she begins to get to higher levels, or gives her Oki. But really, it just looks like they maybe just do more damage, and she's really going to be about, like you said, she seems to be more of a mid-range character where she has those vacuumous target combos where if she whiff punishes you, she can pull you in, and now you have to deal with that traditional grappler mix-up of command grab or strike, and that's really good. But otherwise, she's not too quick on her feet, which you would hope not. She can pounce forward with the occasional drive rush in. She's got a really far-reaching sweep where she sticks out her ballet swan legs and sweeps you, and then she's also got that overhead, when those are all sort of like pounce moves from the neutral, so that can keep Manon unpredictable to an extent. But really, I think she's going to be playing this whiff punish game, and like you said, her anti-air with that crescent kick it can be comboed or juggled into a command grab, so she can play that level up game pretty well. But yes, I don't think she's going to be a grappler that gets in and stays in on you. I think she's going to, and most grapplers, if not all in this game, might be more mid-range characters that get the occasional advantage of command grab up close, but it doesn't really define their gameplay, and that's going to be kind of crazy coming from, you know, where we've come from.
Oh yeah, just a night and day difference, and thank goodness too, because we had enough of that in Street Fighter V. It was one of the biggest complaints about the game, and it looks to be heavily addressed, thank goodness. And the same thing with 4. 4 was known as like just Vortex Fighter 4, and it's like most people did not like that much. To finally have that addressed, and I'm not super hopeful it's going to be completely gone, because it's Street Fighter. Okazemi, you know, wait till Ibuki comes out there. We don't know if she's in the game or not, but we'll assume that she's in, since she's one of the most popular characters. More than likely, her Okazemi pressure is going to be crazy, and then people are going to discover stuff we don't know yet. But on a fundamental level, at least right now, it looks to be addressed.
Yeah.
So moving on here, now we've got Lily. Now either her health is low or Honda's damage is really high, or both things, but throughout the match they trade hits in a number of scenarios, and Lily takes more damage than Honda when this happens. So this either means that stamina got implemented in the game, or that just Honda has this incredibly large burst damage, which we'll get into here in a second. But Lily's Condor Spire looks to be 0 on block, and then if it's charged up, it looks to be plus. That is a really interesting scenario for this character, and she is reminding me a bit of El Forte, a little bit of Mika, and then of course like a baby T-Hawk, kind of mixed all in together. She has just this ton of range on her normals, and then those normals can be special canceled. That is usually a lack of Capcom rarely gives that to characters in their Street Fighter games, where you have a long range normal, you usually cannot special cancel it. That is not the case with Lily, but the offset of that is she has a lot of recovery on her big normals. So if you're trying to fish with those in neutral and someone jumps on you, you are definitely eating that jump in. And if you whip with that, punish counters are going to be a really big deal in this game. So Lily is definitely a character with a lot of range, but you do not want to whiff with those normals.
It's almost impossible to talk about Lily without comparing her to T-Hawk, because she has a handful of his special moves. That said, she does not come across at all as a grappler, which T-Hawk was definitely a grappler, although one with some odd mobility, and really that never quite came together for him. So I'm glad to see that Lily isn't really that. She's got those, you know, Condor Spire and the uppercut and the dive, but she seems to me to be like a medium speed character who, again, is all about getting hits from like medium range with her extended reach with those clubs, and then yes, canceling it into special moves. To me, it's like, I don't think she's a character that you want to give a lot of space to. You don't want to let her stock one of those wind upgrades, because then she becomes an enhanced version of herself. Then she can, you know, just put the move on you, go into the Condor Spire, and then be plus in your face, and like that's an earned advantage if she gets the stock and then does all that, right? But she seems to be kind of like a medium speed character with decent reach, and that might be enough to get the job done in this game, especially since she can like you said, confirm into those specials. But yeah, man, Honda hits her hard, and I personally think it is that Honda does a relatively high amount of damage compared to the rest of the cast. But yeah, I think if you're fighting against Lily, you don't want to give her space, and you don't really want to be at medium range. You probably want to be up in her face, and I guess my analysis of this is where she doesn't want you to be. But that's the first thing that kind of came to my mind.
Yeah, her air charges to do souped up moves. Like, is she like the other grapplers in the game? Appear to be fairly dependent on resources, and if you don't have those resources, I don't know if this character's a bit dead in the water. She also has, like Cammy, a lot of light confirms into combos, and her damage looks to be abysmal. Like I'm sitting here watching her just hit Honda, and it's like, oh man, she's doing nothing until she gets a command grab. She gets command grab, that does pretty well, but all of her lights and other stuff, it's not Cammy bad, but it's pretty bad. And then her command grab, speaking of that, is actually 5 frames, just like Zangief's, and it makes me think that basically all command grabs in this game are going to be 5 frames on the regular. No, there might be a few exceptions out there, like 6, 7, 8 frames or whatever. We've seen that before, but generally speaking, it looks like, to balance this game, that they've made command grabs 5 frames almost universally.
Yeah, so I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how people implement and how this kit all works together, again, in the atmosphere of the Street Fighter 6 drive mechanics. But Lily seems interesting to me, but she's not one that I'm like, that's a top tier character for sure.
Yeah,
I have to see a little more before I get there.
Yeah, I'm pretty skeptical on her right now. So moving on here, we've got Honda, and then so some moves in this game are definitely designed around countering drive impacts, and that's like Honda's headbutt, as Lily tries to do a drive impact on what looks to be Honda's light headbutt, and he has enough time to see that and do his own drive impact in reaction to it. So it's like, oh wow, like you can't just sit there and fish for, you know, drive impact and neutral basically. If the moves are designed in the right way, basically if moves have X amount of recovery, you can't drive impact them on reaction and neutral. And that looks to be a really interesting design decision that Capcom made early on, that certain moves basically, if how does Honda's headbutt or his sumo smash or all this other kind of stuff, how does that react to being drive impact? And it looks like they thoroughly went through every single move like that and basically designed around it, so you can't just mash away on drive impact and hope for good results. You really have to be calculated about it, and that's quite an interesting thing here. And speaking of drive impact, before we move on too long, we do have armor breakers in this game. It's confirmed. Marisa's got a couple of them. We'll get into it more there, but that is yet another counter for drive impact. So it looks like the developers have really drilled in on this one particular aspect of the gameplay and said, like, you can do it, but it's not a free win button. It's not an automatic thing.
And it absolutely needed to not be that, because just when we first saw it, we all knew, oh, this is going to be very alluring for especially new players to do because of how many obvious benefits it has on both defense and offense. It better not be broken. And it doesn't really look like it is. Everyone's going to have this buffer period where they have to get used to drive impact. Where, you know, just like how after you play enough times, you kind of have anti-airs down without having to think about it, and it becomes like you really need to earn a jump in. People can't just jump in on you for free. The same thing is going to be true about drive impact, and for a while we're going to feel the pain of this really strong move, but I think it is has been very directly attended to. Now that said, I do think that you will be able to beat things like headbutt with drive impact. It's just that the headbutt needs, if it's spaced correctly and if the drive impact is too late, like we see in this footage, Honda is going to have a chance at landing and then going into his own drive impact. But, you know, in the same way that you can use drive impact to go through fireballs, you have to space it right, and it has to be, I don't know that it necessarily has to be preemptive if it's at the right space, but, you know, if a Honda's doing a full screen headbutt, you're going to drive impact that thing. But if he's doing a light headbutt from this ranges where a Honda traditionally in other games would be doing that because they're usually pretty safe and you just check you, I think that yes, drive impact won't be a coverall to just beat that, and you'll have to think about it before you just go after Honda.
So Honda definitely has combos this time around, much more akin to a Street Fighter V version than any other version we've seen in this one regard. Combos for Honda have been pretty much like a faux pas. Like, I mean, he has a couple of them, but generally he's just this hard-hitting character who does a lot of one-off damage. But now he's got his 100-hand link combos again, which are awesome. Those really debuted in Street Fighter 4, came back in 5. And speaking of that, Honda actually feels like a cross between his Street Fighter 5 and Street Fighter 4 versions, with some very decent defensive options from 4, but very good normals and neutral, and some solid combos which come from 5. So it's quite interesting. And then he has his V skill 2 from 5 back as well, where he charges up his 100-hand slap if you give him any kind of space. And then his burst damage, ooh, he hits like Honda should hit, you know, kind of thing, where you give him that opening and he is just draining, like, you know, 50% of your life. That is what I'm really happy to see. So this to me feels like the version of Honda that 5 probably should have been, and I'm really glad to see him on the launch roster from day one. It's like, yeah, here we go. This is what Honda should be.
I'm having a hard time pinning down exactly what Honda is in this game. I have notes, pretty crazy damage, and he's turtly for Street Fighter 6. A lot more characters are going in, and Honda does have forward movement, but I think he has to earn that forward movement in a lot of different situations. And Honda has traditionally been that sort of turtle character who's holding down back, and as you try to open him up, he's frustrating you and you know, anti-air headbutting or stopping you with normals or whatever it is. And then as you basically get tired or you get sloppy as you try to get in and you try to open him up, he takes advantage of any openings you give him there and hits you with moves that are not the best for opening people up. But again, you kind of do that yourself as you divert all of your attention to offense and forget defense. And I think that's what they're going for with Honda here for the most part, because I don't see him initiating a whole lot. I think he does want to play kind of more reserved and turtley at first, and again, wait for those openings. But when he gets them, he's just destroying you. And this actually might be the most polarized. We talked about grapplers earlier, how they're kind of like, they're either amazing or they're not, and it's better when they're not. This might be closer to that in Honda, in that he does so much damage that it's like you either get in on him and go crazy, or he sort of stops you and shifts the momentum, which is to Capcom's credit, if that's what they're doing, that's kind of like what sumo tends to be, is a maneuvering of, and a control of momentum. So that's really cool. And also I have to shout outs to his level 3 where he makes the ring with your face and then slams you out of it. That's great. I really like the ideas and the design in this character. I'm wondering how this is going to operate within the context of the game, though, and if he might be either way too good or way too, hard to balance, but we'll see.
Yeah, it's some of the original 8, that's the big problem with them. It's how come Guile's only had a handful of moves over the years, because his moves tend to be so good and so dominant, Capcom's kind of afraid to give him other stuff. But moving on here, Zangief lacks tons in the way of Okazumi pressure. It almost doesn't even feel like Zangief in some ways watching this
character anymore. No.
Yeah. It's so different, but where he makes up for that is the raw damage his SPD does, and then of course his drive impact, which people still are going to miss Green Hand for a number of scenarios that it was really good in, but this sucker moves him forward even further than Green Hand does, and it's definitely going to be more plus on block and hit with a number of his normals than Green Hand ever was. Man, does this sucker have a ton of range, but it looks designed, again, even though SPDs, command grabs, do hard knockdowns now, the most that Zangief is consistently getting off of an SPD is a very long-reaching standing medium punch where he's hitting you with like the tip of his fingers. He is not in range to do another command grab. Maybe if he walks up a little bit further, but again, just hit him back with the normal at that point. But Zangief is a night and day different character than he was in 5, and thank goodness, because in 5 he was a dumb character, very dumb character, because that one time he gets in, you might be dead, and it's nice to have another chance or two to push him back and get it there. Yeah,
some might say he's the worst in the game. That's a different video, though. Anyways, and that wouldn't be John. There was a little contention there. So go check that out if you haven't seen it yet. We ranked we did a final Street Fighter 5 tier list. But in Street Fighter 6, Zangief is, first and foremost, similar to what they did with Honda, with really emphasizing his sumo nature. They've really leaned into Zangief being a wrestler. And I forget who said this. Somebody else had mentioned this a few weeks ago. But he went from being traditionally like a bodybuilder with super defined muscles to just being a big hulking guy with not as much definition, but that's more along the lines of a big wrestler type. And you see that in all of the different wrestling moves he obviously does now. When he calls out like the Undertaker's last ride, he's got the people's elbow, he's got drop kicks, and Ric Flair chops. But he does these moves and they knock you away. A lot of times Zangief gets close, and including his SPD, it gets the damage, but it doesn't seem to give Oki. And so what it looks like is Zangief is going to be more of a mid-range character, with, when he does get close, has an advantage with the command grab, but is not necessarily built all the way around that. He'll be playing more neutral and trying to land these really heavy hits. And I'm beginning to see kind of like a spectrum of characters in Street Fighter 6 where, they might be more offensive, they might be more defensive, but even within like the offensive side of things, I'll talk about that a little bit more later, comparing like Cammy and Marisa, but Zangief looks to be a sort of like in the middle, with a forward kind of march, maybe slightly towards the offensive side, but certainly not like he just wants to get in. He wants to whiff punish you. He wants you to not be ready for a drop kick, and he's even got the counter that actually worked this time around. So very different than I'm just going to keep throwing myself at you until I eventually get in, and then I have the advantage, and potentially much more nuanced and potentially a better kind of character.
Yeah, I hope so. A little bit, as you say, more nuanced. One of the things that's quite different, though, is his level 3 appears to have either 9 frames of startup or something like 3 to 4 frames of startup. In Street Fighter 4 and in 5, his final Atomic Buster, either his Ultra 1 or his Critical Art, that had basically either 1 frame of startup or 0 frames of startup, where if you saw it, you couldn't jump out of it. That might be changing now, depending on how this move functions. And this might be actually directly to address Zangief as a modern control character, where his this is normally a 720 command to do this. With modern controls, it might just be down on the controller and then 2 buttons, and then you do the final Atomic Buster, right? And this sucker drains about 55% of the life, and it is unbelievable. It's like, oh my gosh, really? But again, to offset this, the very long startup might traditionally change how this move functions, because you could use it like a reversal, you could use it as a mix-up, you could use it as so many different things. But if you can jump out of this thing on startup, which it looks like a possibility right now, it might mean that Zangiefs have to go to a whole nother set of tricks and other things to actually land his level 3, which I am personally fine with. I've seen those tricks a lot of times over the years, and it's kind of like you either did it or you didn't, and sure, kind of thing. You either took off 60% of my life because you guessed correctly or not. I'm fine with that binary choice being a little bit more nuanced, as John would say. So I'm very happy to see this change personally.
And like, to me, that sounds like the traditional grappler strike command grab mix up for a lot of your life, but only in limited situations. So there's still shades of traditional command grab Zangief grappler, but it's only in like level 3 situations, and otherwise he's playing this game that really agrees and balances with the other characters a lot more, as opposed to, like I said, just he's in or he's not.
And then a couple last things here on Zangief is he has armor on his standing heavy punch, and that's going to make that a really good move, not only up close, but in neutral. We can see him use it quite a bit here against Marisa. That is a very good move for him, and it seems like it'd be charged up as well to make it stronger. So that's a nice thing. That looks to be like a go-to move again for Zangief. That's been in several versions of the game where his standing heavy punch is a big deal. And then it seemed like there was numerous times in this footage here where Zangief could and should be using his lariat as a reversal to stop pressure, but we don't really see that in the footage at all. And it makes me think that Zangief's lariat is going to be much closer to Street Fighter V's version than it was Street Fighter 4, where it basically was like the ultimate utilitarian move, where it's like it's an anti-air, it's a reversal, it's an everything, just match your face on the joystick and he's going to spin around, he's going to take up half the screen, and maybe you can punish it and stuff like that. It was definitely toned down in 5, but in this game the range looks to be way worse than it was in 5R4, and there's a couple opportunities here for Zangief to definitely anti-air Marisa with his lariat if it worked that way, like it did in past games, and it does not look to work that way again, which is that move is one of the reasons how come Zangief is so dumb in these other games, because it's such an easy one button on reaction, anti-air, reversal, all this other kind of stuff, and now they're actually making Zangief players think instead of just churning butter and mashing their face on the joystick. It's nice to see a little bit more thought put into this character.
I think it's the biggest success if Zangief ends up being a mid-tier. And I mean, it's going to shuffle around, of course, after the initial launch, and we find out all the problems of vanilla and whatnot. But if Zangief ends up being mid-tier, especially right out of the gate, I think what they've done here with the character, with the archetype even, is significant and maybe trend-setting for the future.
Yeah, hopefully. We know grapplers end up being top tier in the early parts of games, so where Zangief is at the very start versus where he's at, with the bit of time might change up quite a bit. Sure. But grapplers tend to be very dominant in people's minds, and then less dominant as some time goes on. But speaking of the next character, Marisa, she seems to have quite a bit more reach and mobility than you would expect for a character of her size, and she also seems to have a lot of recovery on those attacks, leaving her open to punish counters and jump-ins when she commits to a bad option in neutral. So she's powerful, but that recovery is definitely going to eat you alive when you try to do it. And then she has two really interesting moves with like her EX wind-up punch and then her EX overhead hot punch. Both are armor breaking, and I'm really wondering if you can break parry with an armor breaker. Like, not only does it break the armor on that, like I wonder if you can even parry these armor breaking attacks.
The hot punch is armor breaking, because that gets parried by Zangief, I believe, in the footage.
The EX version is armor breaking at least, so it might need to get the EX property on there to make it the armor breaking, but it's quite interesting. So there's going to be a meta here. I remember Adon in Street Fighter 4 where he had like 15 armor breaking moves. I think he had like 3 or 4, but they all seem to break armor, so it was like you could never focus against Adon, right? I'm wondering if Marisa might be a very similar character in that regard, where it's like if she is a hard counter to any character who has a lot of armor based attacks. And moving on here, she seems to be very based around her normals and specials, not her command grab. This is something like Abigail, who is you've got a command grab, it's part of his repertoire, but it's not a huge part of what he's trying to focus on doing, and that very much seems like Marisa. She's got a command grab, it works well, but it doesn't seem like a huge basis for what she's trying to do at most points in the match.
It's just specific situations, it might be terrifying, but it is not what command grabs have traditionally been. for grappling characters. And again, that lines up with what we've seen with Manon. It lines up with what we've seen with Zangief. Same idea for Jamie, for that matter, who gets a command grab at level 3 of his drinks. But yeah. Also, she does do the EX dive punch in the Zangief footage, and he does parry it. So I don't think that these moves are going to beat parry. That said, they still have a lot of utility, clearly. And so Marisa is a character that obviously very different from Cammy, of course, but I would say that both of these characters are all about starting the offense more so than most of the rest of the cast. These are the characters that are farthest along on the side of the offense and begin the offense spectrum. She is kind of about bullying and haymakering her way in, and kind of like grapplers before. I think she's gonna spend a little bit of life missing. She's gonna be shooting 3-pointers, so to speak, right? But when one of those hits, or when one of these moves hits, she's doling out so much damage. And so what I think happens in the Marisa meta, so to speak, she's going to have that threat for you. She's slow, she's whiff punishable, so she's kind of at a disadvantage, but she's going to be the one out there taking those risks, and once she does get you, that's when you're in trouble. So you're going to clam up a little bit, and if you commit to certain moves and she does one of her armored attacks, guess who's winning, right? So you're not going to outmuscle Marisa, and that's her slight advantage when she's kind of in this dueling neutral. But you're going to have to be patient. Now, if she hits you with one of these, takes you to the corner, lops off all your health, you're going to be hesitant to commit to things because, again, that armor is going to beat you. Although everybody has drive impact in that same way, so I don't know how effective this is going to be if it ends up being a crucial part of her game plan. But that aside, what you might do is clam up because you don't want to commit. And if you do that, she walks you slowly to the corner where you do not want to be in this game, and that might be kind of Marisa's game plan. But she's slow, she's going to outmuscle you, and once she gets that one hit, it's going to be a big deal. It's just, well, have you hit her enough times as she's made her attempts to get you there? Or have you, cowered and gone all the way back in the corner where now it's an even bigger deal because you're not running away and those big haymakers are still coming. But again, I'm especially with the fact that you can parry these armor moves, I do think that it's gonna be more on the defender or the person playing against Marisa than it is on Marisa. And if that's the case, maybe not the highest of tier characters.
Yeah, her damage, it doesn't feel as strong as Geef's, but it's probably a step below it. And if you compare her to like someone like Cammy, when she hits you, it hurts a lot. She is a very powerful character. So it's going to be quite interesting how she breaks down. And then the last thing here is that I'm so happy to see the return of armor breakers. I really did enjoy that feature in Street Fighter 4, and it basically went away entirely in 5. And if you're going to have armor moves, it is nice that if you sniff it out, you can just clearly break it up with an armor breaking attack. And I hope that every character has one in the game. Like, whatever it happens to be, I just hope that there's a clear armor breaker. I know Dawson fans out there are like, yeah, give me an armor breaker, please, because I'm a dead man without that. But, we really don't know how the game is going to play in the meta, like what's really going to evolve, what's really going to be dominant. Early read for a lot of people's, drive rush. We've talked about that a lot. We've talked about drive impact being really good, but, the counters are so baked into the game. Capcom has very clearly accounted for drive impact being such a low-cost resource and so powerful. So it's going to be quite interesting what emerges in here, but man, I'm just so happy to see armor breakers back. It's so frustrating to deal with a character who's got 50 hits of armor and you can't do anything except for basically jump away. So. Yeah,
I don't think Marisa would be a complete character if she didn't have that key aspect. I think she's going to be using that, like I described, to like make the rest of her game more solid. Basically, that's one of her juggling pins she's throwing your way that you have to be worried about, and therefore manipulates you before even doing anything, with the potential of doing it. But I do think that's a key part of her kit for sure.
All right, y'all. That's going to wrap us up for this week of EventHubs Talk and Block. Once again, thank you all so much for listening, and we'll be back with you soon.